to talk to you about why she cares about content design and why you should too, and about how content design thinking can make your projects clearer and kinder and more effective. So a big welcome to Kat. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and over to you.
Okay, thank you. Right, I will present ladies of UX. Okay. Yeah, okay. So you should be able to see my slides there. So hello everyone, I'm Kat. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Paula. The talk is about content design, and it's kind of pitched at more of an introduction to content design. So skipping through the slides, the discussion points that we're going to focus on is a bit of a journey piece about how I got into content design. Then we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about what content design actually is and the principles behind it. I've also got some examples of content design that I've seen out in the wild, and also a piece of content design that we did for NHS.UK. And then the last thing, I've kind of pulled together some tips and kind of highlight some ways of working to try and get your content to be more helpful, clear, accessible and inclusive. And there's some of the principles that we'll come across a little bit later. Just to say as well, I can't see anybody now. So if you, put up your hand or just interrupt me if you've got a question, that's fine. So diving straight in, life at CGI. So I'm currently a senior consultant for CGI with a focus on content design. We have been with CGI for about 6 months now. Previously, I was working with BJSS and Spark for the past kind of 3 years. At CGI, they've kind of taken our whole kind of human-centered design capability. So within that, there are about 20 content designers. And we're surrounded by a group of product designers, service designers, user researchers, and T-shaped kind of more digital consultants who can put on kind of any of those hats. So from there, we've actually got quite a lot of communities where you can learn from. So it's a really, really kind of nice setup. How we're kind of working on projects is we might be put in as a kind of solo content designer to kind of augment teams in businesses. We could also come in as a whole kind of wider UCD team, and by that you might get a product designer, service designer, researcher and content designer, and we'd come to kind of solve a problem. But also we can do some capability building, so we might come in and kind of strengthen, let's say, content design within a marketing community, and kind of build up that capability within a business. Okay, so content design is quite new. I would say quite-ish new. Content has been around obviously for a long time, but I always think it's worth, as a content designer, talking a little bit of how I got here. So often you might find two content design kind of backgrounds, the first kind of coming from journalism and the second from more of a marketing copywriting background. Obviously people come in from all kind of avenues, but often they're the kind of the two most common backgrounds. So here I've kind of highlighted my squiggly-ish career. I say squiggly-ish because to somebody who maybe isn't as deep in content as I am, they might just see content kind of pretty much all over those steps. But there are differences between each role, which I'll kind of briefly touch on. The first, which I have included because I think it's actually really important, is the 5 years that I kind of did on-off at my local pub. I think that really opened my eyes to the importance of customer experience. And it's quite nice to reflect back now to the importance of those kind of key guide rails that people would expect in the pub. So, you know, is it open? Can I kind of see an entrance to the car park? When I arrive, are the menus on the table? Is there somebody that I can place my order with? Can I see what beers or soft drinks are available? And it's these kind of things that actually, when you look at digital, they also need to be in place. You need to have your house in order to make sure that a user has a great experience, and seeing how it all clicked together and that emotion or impact it might have was actually a really great I think learning curve for me, which I didn't realize I was probably having. So after going to university, I started off as a kind of marketer copywriter. Most of this was with the Press Association and the University of Nottingham, and this was really marketing focused. So looking at kind of email marketing, using good old MailChimp, looking at website copy, social media content. It was more kind of salesy focused, and how we could kind of bring in new business. And then I moved to Sydney, just decided to take a bit of a plunge, and spent 3 years over in Australia. And in that time, I kind of picked up quite a few different digital content producer, or there's a typo on that slide, sorry, different content producer roles. And there was actually a really interesting digital leader that I was under called Tony, and he was a bit of a fangirl of GDS, which is the government design services. And he was kind of striving to kind of bring that way of thinking to some of the Australian New South Wales government. So that was really eye-opening for me, kind of going from some quite kind of salesy heavy writing to actually how do we make content accessible and inclusive for everybody. After leaving Sydney, I moved back to Nottingham, and Nottingham's head office, Boots' head office is based in Nottingham. So I applied and received a job as a lead digital copywriter for Boots, and this was e-commerce focused, as kind of it sounds. So this was really, again, another change in what we were writing about. It was very salesy focused. For those 2 years as a copywriter, I was in charge of kind of the home page, the shop pages, the product description pages, and making sure that that content was really selling, but also keeping brands happy, as well as keeping the Boots brand team happy. So it was a bit of a kind of juggling lots of different competing priorities, but it was really fun. It was quite fast paced. And then from there, I bounced to another role in Boots, and this is a newly created digital campaign manager. So obviously the marketing campaigns in Boots are absolutely massive, but .com, which was the website team, didn't really ever have a seat at the table. So we were kind of left out the whole kind of few years that I was a copywriter there. And it was quite an interesting task of making sure that we were heard in that space. And that was the role that I took on as the campaign manager. So leading on how Christmas, how things like the Love Island campaign, how Valentine's Day all showed up on the Boots.com website, where messages should be, how we can optimize them, really working quite closely with Google Analytics and sales data to make sure that we were kind of pushing the right products, and just make sure that user journey as well, from when adverts were seen kind of at the bus stop or on the TV, that those products or what messaging that we were highlighting was then replicated on the website. So that was really fun. And then I got to content design, so that's about 3.5 years ago. A colleague of mine from Boots had actually made the leap into content design and at Spark, and he was really enjoying it. So he kind of pushed the job description in front of me, and yeah, the rest is kind of history. So I'll go on to later what I really enjoyed about it, but I really enjoyed the blend of kind of the thinking that went into the Boots campaign manager role, but also being able to kind of write content and yeah, kind of pull both those things together in a less salesy format was really attractive. Okay, so all content roles, are they the same? Can't see anyone, but hopefully not everyone's nodding, and the answer is no. So I think, because content design is so new, there are quite a lot of content roles kind of flying around LinkedIn especially, and it can be quite useful to kind of have a loose understanding of what kind of you'd be asked to do in each role, because they are quite different. Copywriter, so a copywriter is, as kind of suggested already, they're focusing mainly on selling as their primary target, and they will often be led more by business needs. A UX writer, it's quite an interesting kind of pot of skill there, because often a content designer would be expected to do some UX writing as well. But a UX writer is more focused on writing clear, functional copy to help a user move through their journey. So again, more focused on user needs than business needs. A content strategist. So a strategist is somebody who's not as on the tools as a UX writer or copywriter. You might expect a content strategist to really kind of take care of the long-term goals of content. So thinking about sign-off process, thinking about how the content can kind of, how often you need to review it to make sure that you're checking in on user needs, what kind of KPIs might you be agreeing for that content, and from there, kind of shaping teams. So it's a real kind of strategic viewpoint across content, less on the tools. And a content designer, I think, might be expected to do a little bit of all three, but content designers are really focused on user needs and creating clear, useful and accessible content to do that. Okay, so next slide is about content design and what it is. So content design as kind of said, it was founded quite recently, and Sarah Winters, who is the founder of the practice, this is quote really sums up content design. So content design is a way of thinking. It's about using data and evidence to give the audience what they need at the time they need it and in a way they expect. So I don't know if there's anything surprising here. I don't know if anybody wants to chip in about this quote. Okay, if not, because I definitely have some things that are surprising. So from my end, I think what's surprising is that the first sentence is highlighting that it's a way of thinking. So you don't need a badge, you don't need a certificate to kind of put your content design hat on. Anybody can adopt content design as a way of thinking and bring it to their practice. And the second thing is that there's no mention there about writing. Words aren't mentioned at all. For me, what breaks this down really nicely is the focus on data and evidence. So you might actually work with a content designer on project and they might not write a word for months on end. And that's okay. And it can be hard to tell stakeholders and clients that that's okay. But we need to spend time in that research space, understanding what the user need is. Then at the time they need it and in a way they expect. So at the time they need it is kind of understanding the user journey and what the user might need in that moment to solve their problem or get to where they need to be. And in a way they expect is kind of hinting towards the language that you're using. There's a lot of research you can do to make sure that you're reflecting the words that your user is using, A, to make your service findable, but B, to kind of give that trust and that kind of comfort when they're going through the journey. Okay, so the other thing to flag about content design is it is a user need-led practice, but of course we need to take into account what the business wants to. This is probably the same across quite a lot of the kind of UX disciplines, but we can't kind of land on user needs and content requirements. That might mean the business needs to spend X amount of money if they don't have that money to spare. So it's when you're looking at content design, it really is a kind of mix of the two, understanding user needs and advocating them, but also being respectful to what the business wants. I think this is also quite an important slide for stakeholder management as well. So stakeholder management is a big part of my job. I also work as a design lead on the project, so I have a lot more naturally, but even as a content designer, words are something that everybody speaks and everybody writes. So often you will kind of be in conversations, and it's great that people are keen, that are led by personal preference. So actually having that ability to kind of manage stakeholders from the kind of the beginning to the end is a really important skill. And I think for me, one of my key strategies here is using the evidence to explain why you've done things. So as you're talking and thinking, as you're thinking through your contents from the beginning, being really clear on why you're doing it and why it's there is something to take note of, but also then it's a great strategy for later on down the line when you might be presenting that content back to stakeholders who are maybe used to getting their way and think something should be the way that maybe you've not done it that way. Okay, so next up is what attracted me to content design. I think I've been quite supportive of it already, but the first thing that really highlighted to me is that it's based on evidence and data. My kind of career history, I've always been quite interested in data and the patterns that you can spot from particularly web analytics. It's obviously not a case for understanding user behavior and not a replacement for user researcher, but actually digging into the data and understanding user behavior patterns can really kind of open the box and start to kind of understand where you might want to put your efforts to solve a problem. So really liked that evidence and data is a key thing here. Second thing is user need. So I hadn't come across really a user need until I got the role as a content designer, and I thought it was a great way of designing, primarily because it shifts the focus from brand egos or budgets onto actually what user needs. So by kind of putting profit aside and by putting kind of, I want this word to be written like this because this is how we say it in our French brand house, it suddenly becomes about the user. And I thought that was a really important part of design and somewhere where I wanted to focus on. User research as well. When I was at Boots, there wasn't actually much time to get hands-on user research time. And I found that quite challenging because we were churning out content almost daily, and we didn't really have an understanding of how it was landing with users. So the fact that the Spark and BGSS setup was that each team was working really closely with a user researcher, obviously assuming buy-in from the client about spending money on research, but that was really attractive to me. And then the last thing, which is probably quite idealistic, I thought I'd be making life simpler and easier for people. And in hindsight, I think this is a really interesting point, because I actually think it doesn't matter what industry you're on you're working in as a content designer. Whatever you're kind of working to, you will probably making life simpler and easier for people. Doesn't matter if in your health or government or e-com, you can kind of have that as a goal wherever. Okay, so content design, when it's bad, it can be bad, and there are some consequences that I think if you're trying to think about where content design could fit, or you're looking to kind of sell it into your leadership, then there are great case studies across the website, which I won't go into here because yeah, it's not really what it's about. But in terms of what, like I suppose high level, for businesses, it can lead to revenue loss, customer loss, reputational damage, and higher revenue spent on things like call centers and returns if you're in the e-commerce space. And for users, it can lead to time loss, frustration, and broken trust, among many other things. Example I have of this recently is I was trying to change a password on an account. And the reason I was trying to change it was my password manager on my phone was telling me that it was a security risk, that it had been leaked, and I was really wanted to change it because I was a bit worried. I couldn't find it anywhere on their website, spent time looking, and I actually reached out to the brand on Instagram to find out how to change it, which again is a real effort. And they came back later and said I had to go through the forgotten password journey, so go back to the login screen, log out, go back, and then go around the houses that way. And that was a loss of time for me, it was frustrating, and again, they had to get somebody to answer my Instagram query. So there's kind of the fact that that wasn't clearly labeled and there wasn't a clear journey for that online meant that had an impact on their kind of workflows. So yeah, there's definitely great case studies there. And Content Design London, which is where Sarah Winters, that's her where kind of she set up, there's a really great case study there recently about how they've had a really great impact on local government. So yeah, worth a look if you're looking for content design case studies. Okay, so there are some principles of content design, which I think are useful to note. I always find principles are great, but it's also really good to see good examples of them. So we'll go on to them next. And so content should be helpful, clear, consistent, accurate, context sensitive, transparent, and accessible and inclusive. So there's quite a list, and there's quite a lot to think about. And I think when you think about kind of micro copy in particular, that's quite a lot to think about for potentially just kind of 4 or 5 words. But kind of being led by these principles and kind of having checklists, or that's kind of what I do, means that I'm kind of getting some of the way there, at least without potentially user research. So I've got some examples, and I'm sure they will resonate with you. And this is a bad one. I don't really like talking about bad content design, but I thought it was worth talking about error messages, because they are kind of a key thing that people might look over in their flow. But making sure your error messages are helpful, accurate, clear, can really help a user get from A to B. So in this example here, it's not very helpful, accurate, or clear. So I just did a few kind of tests with this particular login screen, and the error message actually never changed. So for the email address that I popped in, there's actually no @ sign, and I didn't enter a password, and I selected login. So there's no information there to tell me, oh, actually, your email address isn't in the right format and you haven't entered a password. That might be more useful in this case than username or password, because I could have been rushing. I could have been focused on something else and not actually realized I'd made these mistakes. So you're kind of setting up a bit of a wheel of frustration if your error messages aren't following those principles. And I tested it just to check if it did change based on what I entered, and it didn't. So always the same, whatever kind of combination you put in. And I think if you're aware of error messages kind of as you're going through journeys now, you might start to spot where they potentially could be more helpful and more informative to a user. And that's something that great content design can help you do. This is a great example, I thought. So this was a recent hotel stay of mine. So I stayed in Brighton for the first time, was really great. This hotel called Numa. Everything is online, so I didn't actually see a person the whole time that we stayed there. But they were really kind of great on the communication. So they'd send these WhatsApp messages, and this one here is the day that we were checking in. So it's context sensitive. It tells me today's the day, building up excitement with that nice little emoji as well. And it's also really helpful because it gives me a hyperlink to where the hotel is. And that's preventing me having to go via Google or go back to my original booking email just to find out where it is. And the way they've laid out the key information as well is really quite useful. So seeing your room number, your PIN, what time you need to check in, and the Wi-Fi are all probably quite key things that you want to know. So in terms of information hierarchy, it's laid out quite nicely, and it's easy to scan. The emojis are nice touches. The fact that they've actually got a nice little label next to them makes sure they're accessible. And I would say be careful about just using emojis without a label, because we all interpret them very differently. And then the second kind of paragraph of quite long content is just confirming where you use your PIN. So I suppose your next questions might be, well, what do I do? How do I get in? And that's answered quite quickly here in a message. And the fact that it's on WhatsApp is actually really great, because that's kind of my go-to communication platform, I'd say, at the moment. I think it's interesting the fact that they didn't have people in the hotel. We saw a couple that couldn't get in, and they had a baby, quite a stressful aura coming from them because they had been let in the day. They were in the lobby, but their pins weren't working, but there was nobody there to like help them out in the moment. And it's quite an interesting, I suppose, sacrifice that you would make if you kind of went down this route on service design, I suppose. But yeah, from a content design perspective and bringing you kind of along the journey, I thought they really hit the nail on the head. Okay, next up is a piece of content that I worked on for NHS.UK. This is the BMI calculator results page. I say BMI, I know it makes a lot of people shudder, and it's quite it's quite a heavy kind of context piece. But I've just kind of screen grabbed the very top of the page just to talk through how some of the principles come to life. So the heading one here is your BMI is 28.8. And this is quickly followed by a line that tells you what category your BMI is in. We spent a lot of time deciding what should be in that first heading. The clear user need was a user wanted to understand what their BMI was. The whys differed. So it felt like BMI needed to be in the top space, but actually what people are probably more interested in is what weight kind of category that leads them to. So we spent quite a bit of time deciding on this setup, but from testing, having the number lead in the H1 was actually the better route. There are a few reasons for this. A number was actually what people expected. Secondly, following with the overweight category just underneath, they didn't have to do much work looking for what it meant. And then thirdly, people would actually use this tool quite regularly to check how they were doing on their weight loss or weight gain journey, or if they were just maintaining their weight. So actually having the number up here was a really quick reference point for people, and they could just fly through the 3 questions and get the information they needed and leave. The other thing that the number is great for is that the number is universal. So every kind of BMI tool will be using that. So it's consistent with other kind of service points of the BMI across like healthcare. So a GP would understand that, which is also really important. It's accurate, so towards that decimal place means that if you are shifting by a point, you can you've got that kind of understanding and that satisfaction. The next thing is this title here is this sub copy is quite context sensitive. So BMI and weight is quite a sensitive category, and we were really cautious about making this personal because it's quite a sensitive topic, but also some people disregard the BMI because it doesn't track your muscle, so it's just purely your height and your weight and your ethnicity. And this language, your BMI, is in the overweight category, we felt was less personal than kind of just going straight in and saying you are overweight. And I think we the reason that we really didn't want to go in so harshly was as well, we don't know what position the person at home might be in. So it just felt like more of a kind of safety kind of, patient safety kind of piece of language there. The next thing to just touch on is the graph, the chart. So the chart that we included here, you might not be able to see, but there are some kind of colour. So the 3:1 colour contrast makes it WCAG 2.2 compliant. And then between the different bars, there are some solid bars, the yellow and the purple, and the teal and the red have got kind of lines behind it. So this means if somebody is colourblind, or they're just looking at the page in black and white, they can quite easily, well, hopefully see between the different sections of the graph. We've got a key here as well, so it's quite easy just to reference quickly what category you're in if you miss this content here. And then we've got markers so that you can see where each category starts and begins. The graph was also really quite useful for people who were landing at the top or the bottom of any category. So it kind of acted as this motivational kind of factor for people who potentially wanted to go down or wanted to go up a category. They could see they were quite close. They almost felt like that was a bit of a spur on moment, which was really interesting because at a time we were actually wondering if we needed a chart, and we tested without a chart, but actually found that there is value there. The reason we originally questioned whether we did need a chart was because charts aren't accessible to everybody. So hence why we put these measures in with the 3:1 colour contrast, but also what's really important to make charts and graphs accessible is having your chart description clear on the page. So you might be tempted to put your alternative text kind of in the kind of coded part of a CMS, or have it so that a user needs to right click to open it, or a screen reader to read it. But actually having it, having it here on the chart description means that a user can quite easily click into it. They can read what's being displayed. So the chart description would update based on the user's information that they inputted. And also we've described the chart. So if they have got partial sight and they can see part of it but need a bit of help explaining it, then that information is here, and that's why the colours are also included if you can see them. It's also worth noting here that the chart description is useful for actually more users than just people who use a screen reader. So it's a really great example of actually designing for that kind of need has helped the majority of people, and we've seen that in other health tools that we've done across the NHS too, that this chart description and a kind of written description is really useful, because charts and graphs can actually just be quite challenging to interpret. Okay, that is my examples done. I'll just flip back. I don't know if there's any questions, or I can.
Yeah, we've got a few comments and questions. Really fascinating. I mean, Harriet, would you like me to read out your question, or would you like to say your question? I'll read it out then. Harriet says, would you be able to elaborate on its evidence base? Do you mean you are writing copy and monitoring it, or generally speaking, as in good content makes a general difference for the user?
I think a bit of both. Sorry, I can't remember verbatim what I was saying 10 minutes ago. So I think good content does make a general difference for the user, and I think there are ways to monitor your content. So looking at A/B testing is a great way to really zoom in on where your content is making a difference, and then testing. So kind of running a moderated tests if you've got a few different options of content, so you can kind of get that feedback, and you don't need to be paying kind of big bucks to sit down and interview people. So I think monitoring it as well, looking at search. So if people's languages are changing over time, can you track that? If you're seeing kind of search terms that I think I mentioned or haven't mentioned yet, but Moz I'll reference later on, you can kind of highlight keywords and see how popular they are, or if they're waning over time. So I think there's ways that you can stay on top of like language and kind of monitoring your content, and also I would say it makes a general difference for the user if you do have that kind of that eye on it.
Great,
yes.
thanks.
And just going on to Emily. Emily, would you like to say your question, or would you like me to read it out?
Hi, sorry, I was struggling to come off mute and there's background noise, so let's see how this goes. Yeah, I was just wondering if anyone's aware of any way that I can tag what is going to be suitable for any users coming to a website. Because at the moment we've got a few different members of staff, and it just wouldn't be suitable for me to go, can I see everything beforehand? I'm presuming there's some sort of plugins I can install, but I just don't know of any.
I can take a plugin, Emily. There's a tool called Wave, which is a browser plugin that you can run staging environments through, and it does give you an overview of kind of where things are breaking, and there's quite a nice summary page. So if you're also not a developer but you have developers in your team, there's also a technical side of that too, as well as content and looking out for things like alt text and stuff like that.
Thank you.
And I think, Harriet, we'll come back to your second bit of your question. Would you, Kat, would you like to kind of carry on, and then we'll have a bit further on?
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so this is the kind of last section, and hopefully it's the most useful. So I've taken the 7 principles and just zoomed in on 3, and these are the 3 that I think if you kind of start to bring in some of this thinking into your work, you'll have a bit of a halo effect, and also time. Can't really go through everything. Starting off with making content helpful, each of the slides are set up by way of like a checklist, and then also a way of working. So this helpful content is really kind of more about establishing your user needs, and to make sure, give yourself a really good grounding for that. It makes sense to spend time, as already mentioned, in the research space. So this is kind of a list of discovery activities that you might want to think about. So obviously running around a discovery user research is a great thing to do. I've also I think I've mentioned the power of kind of analytics, but whether you can get into kind of Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics and start to kind of take a look at page trends and data with a product that you currently are working on, that can be a really great way to kind of benchmark different pages and different experiences. And if you're seeing differences there, for example, one page might have way less traffic than others, that might indicate there's a difference there and something that you might want to start researching in. Or I think what's a key here is like drop-off rate as well, if you're looking at a flow. Thirdly is talking to teams that have face-to-face time with users. So your call centers, if you're kind of, anybody who actually speaks to users, I think is a great kind of team to talk to. That might also be kind of whoever's collecting the feedback from your website. Fourth, take a look at what people are searching for. So Google Trends is a free Google offering, and it kind of, it maps the trends of certain keywords over time. There's Moz, which is an SEO tool, which they do have a free account, and you can kind of start to track and monitor keywords that might be relevant to your content and see trends over time. And if then you wanted to build a bit of an SEO strategy about gaining more content, that would be a great place to start that. And there's also this really cool little quirky website called Answer the Public, and it's based on terms. So if you're particularly interested in, I don't know, skirts, then they'll be able to kind of tell you what the search volume is and any kind of break off terms as well. So it's quite interesting in terms of what other user needs are out there that you might be missing. And then lastly, taking a look at research papers and population data. So understanding if there is kind of a gap, or that we're kind of sleepwalking into something. I think with the BMI tool, the obesity crisis that's kind of coming and is on our doorstep was a piece of evidence that we used a lot for the rest of our design later on in the page, where we do encourage people to take some healthy actions. And I would suggest some AI tools are great for this, as long as you prompt them correctly and do run some sense checks. But they're really great at looking at big data and kind of pulling it into insightful things that you can use for your designs. Top tip here is, if you you will get a lot of information in this kind of research stage, because already with those 5 things, there's lots of information coming. So if you're working in a team, divide up the tasks, and collaborative tools like Miro or Mural are really great for this. So you can kind of dump everything on a board, and then when it's time to review, it's all there for you to kind of move around and categorize and work out actually what's useful for the next stage of your kind of helpful content journey. And that will be user needs. So user needs are things that are, I think I've referenced already quite a few times, but they can really help guide your content and make sure that your product is meeting a need, and you're not just kind of off assuming it's a need. And to do this, you need research. So following on from potentially the work that you've just done, it's a great idea to get together as a team and follow this template. So as who is your user, I need to X so that I can do Y. This is all over kind of GDS. So sorry if I'm repeating what's kind of known, but these kind of artifacts are super important for a content designer. And there's an example there for BMI. The reason that they are really important is because they can really guide you as you get into the design process. So when you're in the thick of it, you might find that actually new ideas are coming in. It's all very exciting, but actually having those user needs that you've already previously agreed there as an artifact to relate back to means that you've got a great way of prioritizing key messages and decisions on what to do if you're limited on time. And that's the other kind of key tip here, is that definitely get your whole team, including your stakeholders, agreeing your user needs so that everybody's working from the same page. Okay, so tips for making content clear. The first thing here is to try the content first approach. So quite simply, the content first approach is when you know what you want to design or what you want to say, take to sticky notes first. So try not to think about how it will look. Try not to think about anything like that. It's probably the easiest way to say it. And think about actually what do you need to tell your user at what point in the journey. So this is a really great collaborative exercise. We use Mural and Miro a lot with the sticky notes, and we would kind of take to what are the user needs and what do we need to tell them when. So you can do this on a page level by kind of organizing your hierarchy of messages, but if you need to do this over a flow, this is a great exercise and probably even more important. So working out when you need to communicate what to a user and when you need certain information from them. So especially if it's like a question. So for example, for BMI, we knew we needed weight, height, and ethnicity to be able to deliver the product at the end. Sorry, the answer at the end. So what order does that go in? When you're talking about ethnicity, let's say, what's the content need there? I would probably be questioning why I'm asking that. So having information around that there. So kind of highlighting what the information need is and where is a really great way to start this. And then you can prioritize your messages and then think about what components might suit what you need to communicate. And if you've got a design system, the NHS one is online and it's accessible by anybody. It's a really great way to kind of work out what you need to communicate and select a component that might support that. I know not everybody is lucky enough to work with a design system. So thinking about that component and how it supports your communication need is a kind of, a great thing to do. Top tip here is heading structures. So you have things called heading tags, and they can help you think about your content structure and working through kind of what's your main thing to your second thing, and then also what the relationship is between the content. So you might have content nestled in between content that needs a subtitle. So thinking about that up front is really really useful for later down the line when you get to accessibility, but also can help you with your kind of content first approach. And then here's just a quick checklist for content. So before you once you've written it, this is a great thing to kind of run through, and I run through this before I present to kind of the team. And it's just a quick thing to avoid using idioms, so things like break a leg or bear with, writing in short, simple sentences, using the simple tenses, avoiding contractions, and they can be quite tricky to pick up if somebody's scanning. Avoid acronyms and ask yourself if the content should actually be displayed in a different way. So maybe it's an infographic or a video. And anything you do here is really helping to, I suppose, make your content more inclusive as well, because we should be writing for people who maybe English isn't their first language. Maybe they've got not as a higher reading level as you. So kind of aiming for those kind of more primary school reading ages just means that more people can access the information that you're sharing. Might not sound as snazzy, but it's definitely a more equitable way to write. And there are some great tools out there. My favorite is Hemingway. Definitely worth a write down if you've not used it before. You can input content into the tool. It will tell you the reading age, and it's an American reading age, just to make you aware. And it will also highlight where your sentences are particularly tricky, potentially, or if they're fine. So it gives you really great feedback, so you know potentially where to focus on if you come out with quite a high grade or it's particularly complicated. And then this is nearly the last section. I'm running long. So making content accessible and inclusive. So the first thing to start off with here is really start to think about an inclusive research plan. So thinking about what protected characteristics you might want to involve, what groups face inequalities, and actually how your work or product might be impacting that positively or negatively. There's a document online called Equalities in Health and Equality Impact Assessment, which the NHS uses, and you don't have to be a health product to use it. It quite nicely lists all of the kind of groups that you should be taking into account when you do design a product. So it's a really nice kind of checklist again to run through if you're not sure about where you should be thinking in particular about particular users, and if your product is actually impacting in a negative or positive way. So it's a great kind of exercise to jump on again with your whole team and run through anything that your product might be negatively or positively impacting. And if it's something that's a key group you want to target, then that gives you the kind of grounding to investigate more and potentially run more research. So in terms of a checklist for inclusive content, again, so there's no magic recipe for this. Again, researching is key, but there are things that you can look out for. So are you using gender neutral terms? So saying things like firefighter instead of fireman or firewoman. Do any words carry cultural or historical biases? So the LGBT website Stonewall, they have some really great resources on inclusive language, and I'd recommend you going to have a look, because I was blown away when I learned about some of the kind of historical biases that language has. So yeah, definitely take a look at that. Are you using ableist language? So yeah, taking terms that actually might be like a more medical reference and saying them with negative connotations. Are there any cultural or economic markers in your content? So we work aimed at people who are in classes C1 down to C1 2DE, so they're people with a lower kind of economic household income. So we're quite careful about the language we use on our content. So for example, we try to use the term home, not house. I've said that wrong way on here, sorry. So that way we're not kind of highlighting almost what a house is, because somebody might be in a flat, might want to be in a house, but by us kind of referencing house, they might feel a little bit excluded there. And lastly, if you have images or videos, make sure that they are including people from different ethnicities, genders and cultural backgrounds. The aim here is really to make people feel welcome, and I just really like that phrase, try and make your house as welcome as possible, and if you feel like it's not so welcome, try and talk to people who might be able to shine a light on why. Which leads me to my next top tip, and that is about content crits. So content crits are times when you've created your content and you want people to look at it before it goes to stakeholders or to the public. So invite as many people as possible from different cultural backgrounds and with different experiences to collaboratively review your work. You might get some really useful insights there that can help you strengthen your content and make it more inclusive. Very quickly, last slide, checklist for, well, few more slides, but checklist for accessible content. So accessible content is one cog in a big machine, and there are some things that you can do with content that will get you some of the way there. This is kind of bread and butter stuff, but make sure your headings, which we spoke about previously, the H1s to the H5s, have been correctly assigned to your content. So if a user is tabbing through content using a screen reader, they might go through headings. So making sure they're in a logical order is a really great way to make sure that they can access your content quickly and efficiently. Second is around the descriptive text on a link. So again, people can navigate web pages via links. So making sure that your link text is always different. and is descriptive of where the user is going to, means that that user doesn't have to kind of tab up and work out what's this about. So for example, if it just said shop now or click here, if a user's just seeing 5 of those, they won't really understand what's on the other side. So it's really important to make sure they are descriptive as possible. When it comes to images, if it's a functional image, so it's explaining a point or it's communicating a message, then you should have alt text on that image. If it's decorative, you can leave it blank. And charts and graphs have description. Do charts and graphs have descriptions on the page, which is a bit what the BMI calculator I was highlighting there. Lastly, videos, have they got captions and descriptive voiceovers? And that's descriptive voiceovers wise is something to flag right at the beginning of your video production process, because adding that in on the top and kind of adding pauses can disrupt the experience for pretty much everyone. So yeah, definitely one to flag at the beginning if you're producing videos. The tip here is that accessibility is the role of the whole team. So by kind of working on those things for content, you won't be making sure that your content is accessible all the way through, especially if you're working with developers. Developers haven't created the content. They might not have the awareness of the structure of the order or how you want it to be kind of read as you designed it. So it's really important that you stay close to that kind of production process as it gets handed over to dev and gets built. And as well, the other thing here is you can test these things, especially with a screen reader yourself. Each screen reader is slightly different, but whether you're on a Mac or you're on Windows, you can use kind of the inbuilt voiceover. So if you're unsure and you just want a little bit of help from the kind of in the moment, that is a great kind of tool to use once it's in a developed environment. Tools like Figma don't support that just yet. So that's that. Sorry, running through there. So I've got 3 things to take away because you can forget everything else. Takeaway 1 is that content design is not just about writing content or words. It's about using data and evidence to deliver the right message to the user at the right time. Second takeaway is that a sign you're in need of a content designer or content design thinking is when you save space for words on the screen, but you don't know what should be said. And the third thing is, if you're not able to work with a content designer, you can still adopt content design thinking into your work. And yeah, to go back to the original thing, you don't need a badge. You don't need anything specific to this. Just kind of doing a bit of research, taking some slides here, trying out that content first approach will really bring a bit of that content design thinking to your work. And I'd encourage you to do that because at least give it a try. I think hopefully the benefits you will feel, and we'll hopefully do it again. So yeah, that's the end of the talk. Thank you for listening. Sorry, I've rambled on at the end. I could see the clock going down. So yeah, I'll stop now.
Thanks, Kat. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm definitely going to take some of those tips